I have two books for you today, one about a bag full of money and one about a lucky stone. One brings trouble and the other brings good fortune. This is the first book, and it's about a bag full of money. Who's in Charge of Lincoln by Dale Fife. Now, what would you do if some crook ran up to you and handed you a bag full of money like this? Well, you'd probably be afraid to keep it and spend it because, well, you'd know it's stolen. You'd probably try to give it to some grown-up who would know what to do with it. And Lincoln tried all that, but he couldn't get the grown-ups to listen to him. His father was out of town, his mother was in the hospital, and his older sister was on her way to Washington, D.C. with a school group.
Lincoln crossed the street. He walked past the Savings and Loan Bank on the corner, past the delicatessen and the laundromat. He stopped in front of the grocery store and leaned against the window. He felt so free, he thought he could fly. He was an eagle, soaring high as a jet. He pumped his arms up and down, and the wind and clouds brushed his face. At that moment, a man, with his coat collar turned up and his hat brim turned down, came hurrying down the street. He tossed a brown paper sack into Lincoln's outstretched wings and shoved some bills into his fist. "There's more where this came from if you'll take my lunch to the subway corner and wait for me," the man said over his shoulder as he flashed out of sight in the crowd. Lincoln clutched the bag and looked at the money. The man had given him 3 $5 bills. Zowie! Lincoln took off like a fire engine. Behind him, he heard a clatter of bells. When he was halfway down the street, a police car screamed by. At the subway stairs, Lincoln waited and waited. After a while, Officer Roberts arrived, all business and no nonsense, the way he was when he had no time for jokes. "What are you hanging around for, son?" he asked. "I'm waiting for a man to pick up his lunch," Lincoln said, holding up the sack. "Well, it's way past lunchtime," Officer Roberts said. "Now, you get along home." Pop was a stickler about doing exactly as Officer Roberts said, so Lincoln went home. He let himself into the house, walked to the kitchen, and plunked the sack down on the table. It began to split. Before his eyes, bundles of greenbacks spilled on the table. Was he dreaming? Lincoln closed his eyes, then opened them slowly. He was surrounded by money. He took 3 steps forward, then 3 steps sideways, and looked again. It was still money. Zowie! What would Officer Roberts say about this? Quickly, he emptied his book bag and stuffed the money, torn sack and all, into it. Then he highballed it out of the house. At the subway corner, Officer Roberts was untangling traffic. Lincoln held up the bag. "It's filled with money!" he cried. Officer Roberts was having troubles. He blew his whistle at a lady jaywalker, and at the same time, he was trying to stop a dog fight. A police car whined down the street and stopped right next to him. "Officer Roberts!" Lincoln cried. "Officer Roberts!" Officer Roberts waved Lincoln away. "Now see here, young man, I'm too busy to listen to your yarns today. Away with you, and don't you dare let me catch you back here again." Well, money belonged in a bank. Lincoln knew that. It must be almost closing time. He raced down the street and around the corner. A guard was just pulling the doors closed. Lincoln held up the bag. "It's money!" The guard shrugged, pointed to the closing time on the window, and pulled down the shade. Lincoln stopped to think. What should he do now? If he took the money to Aunt Charlotte's, she'd probably faint. Still, he couldn't just walk around with it, waiting for Uncle Jay to get home from work. Now, if only Sarah were here. He was used to her being in charge when Pop and Mom were not at home. She was bossy, but she did know the right thing to do. But Sarah was on her way to Washington. No, she wasn't. Not yet. Her train wasn't to leave until sometime after school was out. If he rushed to the station, he'd probably be just in time to see her. As he made a dash for the subway stairs, Lincoln saw that Officer Roberts was busier than ever. He was talking with two policemen now. They pointed this way and that. They shook their heads. They wrote things down. Lincoln knew about subways. Often on Sundays after church, Pop took the family to places like the United Nations or Rockefeller Center. Always, he gave the children the money to pay the fares. It was more fun that way. So Lincoln knew how to get places. He went to the change booth, and with one of the $5 bills, he bought some tokens, then dropped one into the turnstile and swung aboard the subway. The Washington train was being called when Lincoln burst into the station. He rushed this way and that, skidding over the floor, looking for Sarah. He remembered that she was wearing a blue dress this morning, so he chased after every blue dress in sight. But Sarah just wasn't around anywhere. Well, he thought, it was just like her to have been the very first one to board the train. Over the loudspeaker, now he heard the last call for the Washington train. He squirreled through the line, headed for the gate, peering up into faces. He was carried along by the crowd right through the gate, and for goodness sakes, there was the train. He sprinted onto the last car and rushed from coach to coach looking for Sarah. He reached the very last one, a real old-timer. But Sarah wasn't an old-timer either. Come to think about it, Lincoln hadn't seen any sign of a high school group on the train. Then he remembered. Sarah's train was an excursion, which meant it would probably follow this regular train and was still in the station. Outside now, he heard, "All aboard!" He dashed for the vestibule. The train began to move. It picked up speed. He stood there with his heart pounding and his skin crawling, while New York vanished.
Now you see how one problem leads to another. Lincoln's day started out pretty ordinary, like any other day. Now he finds himself on a moving train with thousands of stolen dollars and nobody to explain it to. Now I mentioned that our other story was about a lucky stone, just like this, shiny black, with what looks like the letter A carved in. And this stone is in this book, The Lucky Stone by Lucille Clifton. She tells about Mrs. Elsie Pickens and her great-granddaughter, Sweet Tea. Through a series of stories, Sweet Tea's great-grandmother explains how the lucky stone has brought good fortune to the family ever since she got it as a little girl. Here's one of her stories.
Mrs. Elsie F. Pickens was rocking slowly on the porch one afternoon when her great-granddaughter brought her a big bunch of dogwood blooms. And that was the beginning of that story. Ah, now, that dogwood reminds me of the day I met your great-granddaddy, Mr. Pickens, Sweet Tea. It was just about this time, spring of the year, and me and my best friend, Ovella Wilson, who is now gone, was going to join the Silas Green. Used to be a kind of show, went all through the South. Called it the Silas Green Show. Something like a circus. Me and Ovella wanted to join that thing and see the world. Nothing wrong at home or nothing. We just wanted to travel, see new things, and have high times. Didn't say nothing to nobody but one another. Just up and decided to do it. Well, this day, we plaited our hair and put a dress and some things in a croaker sack. Started out to the show. Spring day, like this. We got there after a good little walk, and it was the world, baby. Such music and wonders as we never had seen. They had everything there. Well, it seemed like it. Me and Ovella, we thought we'd walk around for a while and see the show before going to the office to sign up and join. While we was viewing it all, we come up to this dancing dog. Cutest one thing in the world, next to you, Sweet Tea. Dipping and moving and head bound to that music. Had a little ruffless skirt on herself and up on two back legs, twisting and moving to the music. Dancing, 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 till people started throwing pennies out of their pockets. Me and Ovella was caught up too and laughing so. She took a penny out of her pocket and threw it on the ground where that dog was dancing. And I took 2 pennies and threw them both. Music was fast and fast, and that dog was turning and turning. Ovella reached in her sack and threw out a little pin she won from never being late at Sunday school. And me, laughing, all excited, reached in my bag and threw out my lucky stone. Well, I knew right off what I had done. Soon as it left my hand, seemed like I reached back out for it to take it back. But the stone was gone from my hand, and Lord, it hit that dancing dog right on his nose. Well, he lit out after me, poor thing. He lit out after me, and I flew. Round and round the Silas Green we run. Through every place me and Ovella had walked before, but now that dancing dog was a running dog, and all the people was laughing at the new show, which was us. I felt myself slowing down after a while, and I thought I'd turn around a little bit, see how much gain that cute little dog was making on me. When I did, I got such a surprise. Right behind me was the dancing dog, and right behind him was the finest, fast-running hero in the bottoms of Virginia. And that was Mr. Pickens when he was still a boy. He had a length of twine in his hand, and he was twirling it round in the air, just like the cowboy at the Silas Green, and grinning fit to bust. While I was watching how the sun shined on him, made him look like an angel come to help a poor Santa girl. While he twirled that twine one extra fancy twirl and looped it right round one of the hind legs of that dancing dog and brought him low. I stopped then and walked slow and shy to where he picked up that poor dog to see if he was hurt, cradling him and talking to him soft and sweet. That showed me how kind and gentle he was. And when we walked back to the dancing dog's place in the show, he let the dog loose and helped me to find my stone. I told him how shiny black it was and how it had the letter A scratched on one side. We searched and searched, and at last he spied it. Ovella and me lost heart for shows then, and we walked on home. And a good little way, the one who was gonna be your great-granddaddy was walking on behind, seeing us safe. Us kinda walking slow, him seeing us safe. Yes. Mrs. Pickens' voice trailed off softly, and T noticed she had a little smile on her face. Grandmama, that stone almost got you bit by a dog that time. Wasn't so lucky that time, was it? T's great-grandmother shook her head and laughed out loud. That was the luckiest time of all, T, baby. Got me acquainted with Mr. Amos Pickens, and if that ain't luck, what could it be?
I like all the stories, but I think my favorite one is how Sweet Tea becomes the owner of the Lucky Stone herself. Go to the library and look for The Lucky Stone by Lucille Clifton. And if you want to find out what Lincoln does with that bag of money, look for Who's in Charge of Lincoln by Dale Fife.